welcome back to another edition of the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm your host, Sean Meyers, flying solo this week. Unfortunately, co-host Justin Lowry as well as Sean Saputo unable to take time out of their busy schedule to join me today, but we have plenty to cover. We are going to get to both the Raw recap and the SmackDown summary a little bit later in following segments, but first right here we're going to talk about Extreme Rules, breaking down the latest installment of pay-per-view wrestling in WWE, and it took place in my hometown, Pittsburgh, PA. I was in attendance, and I think I have a pretty good perspective of at least the live crowd view of how things unfolded, and certainly it was a major topic, the crowd itself. We'll get to that a little bit later on, but first, let's rewind because myself, Justin Lowry, Sean Saputo all made our predictions a week ago. We submitted those to you on the preview show for Extreme Rules, and now let's take a look quickly at those predictions and exactly how we did. Here are the predictions going into the show, and I should clarify that one match that took place on the pre-show between Andrade Cien Almas and Sin Cara is not represented here. That's because that match was actually announced after we did our podcast last week. So we have 11 of the 12 matches that took place, including all 10 that appeared on the main card. So as you can see the picks, Justin Lowry and I very similar. Sean Saputo had some differences in his selections. And now let's take a look at how they turned out. So as you can see, Justin Lowry was the winner for the top prediction percentage for Extreme Rules, as he was correct on 8 of 11 of his picks. I was right behind with 7 of 11. Justin and I only differed in one match. That was the SmackDown Tag Team titles, which he got right. I was incorrect. And then Sean Saputo went a different route with a number of matches, but he came up with the worst percentage correct, as he went just 6 and 5, just about 500 for Sean Saputo. As once again, we were all better than 50%. That being said, it seemed like it would be pretty predictable going in, and there were a few swerves that we'll get to. A couple of the matches that we were wrong on was Kevin Owens defeating Braun Strowman, although by dubious circumstances, and we were all wrong in predicting that Roman Reigns would defeat Bobby Lashley. That did not come to fruition either. However, we were unanimously correct in a number of choices, including Dolph Ziggler retaining the Intercontinental title, as well as AJ Styles keeping the WWE Championship on SmackDown, and Sanity winning their pay-per-view debut, as well as Finn Balor knocking off Constable Baron Corbin. So predictions aside, let's take a look at some of the biggest takeaways from this show and start with the main event. It was a interesting decision as far as what match would headline this pay-per-view. There was a lot of talk that it would be Roman Reigns and Bobby Lashley, which would have probably not been very popular. I know people are sick of seeing Roman Reigns in the main event, especially in a match that had no titles on the line. I think they made the right decision to make sure that definitely was not the main event, and then it came down to either AJ Styles and Rusev, which, yes, it was for a world title, but didn't have a big-time feel, I think, with the build-up to it. Only a few weeks before, Rusev, really the first time that he's been in this big of a role. And the other match that was a candidate ultimately did end up being the finale. It was the Intercontinental title Iron Man 30-minute match between Dolph Ziggler and Seth Rollins. I believe this one was the right choice after the tremendous match that they had. Really two good matches, the one in which Ziggler won the title initially on Raw, and then the follow-up, the 28-plus minute match that ended in a DQ. Unbelievable. My pick so far for the match of the year on the WWE main roster. So I was glad to see that Ziggler and Rollins got their opportunity to main event. However, I had some serious issues with this match, and I know that the crowd certainly was a major factor in how this one played out. Ziggler and Rollins, I think, for their part, did everything they could to make the match a memorable one, and I have no real complaints about their in-ring performance. However, as Justin Lowry and I had alluded to previewing this, there's some issues when you try to put together an Iron Man match. One of the biggest issues is how do you make it believable with the number of falls that take place in 30 minutes while also keeping the audience engaged. Justin made the point that he prefers a match where you don't know when it's going to end. One fall to a finish, then you really get into each and every pinfall attempt, thinking it could be the one that wins the match. You don't have that same suspense necessarily, especially early in an Iron Man match, even a 30-minute one at that, as opposed to the traditional hour-long ones that started back in the mid-90s in WWE with WrestleMania 12 between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels. That match had just one fall, and it came in overtime, the first ever Iron Man match in WWE, WWF at the time. So just one fall in what turned out to be about an hour and 3 minutes of action. That's incredible. What we saw on Sunday night between Ziggler and Rollins, however, was the complete opposite, with 9 falls in just over 30 minutes. It ultimately did go to overtime. Dolph Ziggler prevailed with a little help from Drew McIntyre. Now, I will specify that a number of these falls were a direct result of Drew McIntyre's interference. He got disqualified, putting Dolph in a 3-0 hole after Rollins had scored the first 2 pinfalls. McIntyre jumps in, attacks Rollins. Ziggler goes down 3-0 because of the DQ, but in the process, McIntyre really gave a beatdown to Seth Rollins, and as a result, Ziggler got a couple of quick falls, ultimately pulled even, and then went ahead as a result of that beatdown. Rollins pulled even later in the match with about 5 minutes left, I believe, and then seemingly was closing in on getting the victory, but as you could see, the clock showing double zeros, time had expired right before Rollins was able to get the pinfall, which would have been the 5th and final fall in his favor, not to be. So for at least a few moments, they teased the audience into indicating that it was a tie. No one was happy with that. And then they said, in the case of a tie, the champion retains. That being said, we've seen Iron Man matches before be tied at the end of regulation. It goes to overtime. I didn't think that there was really any doubt there, especially for longtime wrestling fans, that there would be a decision made by Kurt Angle to go to sudden death, if you will. They ultimately did that, and again, McIntyre ran some interference after previously being thrown out of the ringside area. He came down distracted. Rollins, Ziggler hit the zigzag, got the victory. The other big takeaway from this match, and again, I didn't like there being 9 falls, especially because these two wrestled 28 plus minutes without a fall on Monday Night Raw before it ultimately ended in DQ. I would have been fine maybe a 2-1, something like that. Even if you absolutely had to have 2-2 be the score heading to overtime. However, the first fall in this one in favor of Rollins came, I think, maybe 5 or 6 minutes into the match. And that's just not believable, because if these two are going at it on a pay-per-view in a one-fall match, there's no chance that it ends in the first 5 or 6 minutes. I would have much preferred maybe the first fall at about the 12 to 15 minute mark, and then once both competitors clearly are wearing down, then you might see some more frequent falls. It really didn't work out like that, and I think as a result, the first 15 or 20 minutes with so many falls, and with so much, I guess, overbooking, if you will, ultimately I thought that this, it really slowed down the pace. There wasn't great flow to it before they finally started to deliver in the final 10 minutes. But something else that was talked about considerably with this match was the crowd. I was there, as I mentioned, was not participating in the 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 countdown, much like you would hear at a Royal Rumble. The fans were doing that with the clock every time it got to the final 10 seconds of each minute. So basically what happened is that was the case for about 8 minutes. Then they pulled the clock because they did not want the fans to continue to do that. It backfired on WWE as the fans started doing it even more frequently without a clock. They just did it on their own. And it got to the point where it became a major distraction. Fans were not invested in the action between these great superstars. And I saw some clips that Ziggler and Rollins weren't too happy as they were talking in the midst of the match. They finally did put the clock back up with less than 10 minutes remaining, as they really needed to at that point so that everyone could know exactly where things stood. But again, what could have been a classic match, I think, was overshadowed by the overbooking with too many falls and too much breakup in the action. And in particular by the audience, the fans that just really were easily distracted by a clock and ultimately started making it more about themselves to some extent than the match. So your main event, first time I believe that Ziggler has ever main evented a pay-per-view in a singles match. First time in a long time that the IC title has main evented a pay-per-view as well. Could have been a classic, could have been match of the year potentially it didn't work out like that for a number of factors. So ultimately, I was a little disappointed. I was really excited for that match, and it didn't quite live up to the billing. However, one match that I think matched and in all likelihood exceeded expectations was the WWE Championship match between Rusev and AJ Styles over on SmackDown. That match really, I think, turned out to be maybe the best of the night. And you give credit to AJ Styles. He struggled at times with Nakamura in some big matches, including the one at WrestleMania, but he had a great last man standing at the most recent Money in the Bank pay-per-view, and then in a big match for Rusev in which he had a lot to prove, he delivered as well. So both guys, round of applause, AJ Styles and Rusev, for doing a great job. And not only did they deliver a great match, but there was a few near falls where I was convinced it was over. At one point, Aiden English inadvertently had cost Rusev when he took off the protective pad in the corner. Rusev went face first into it. Then AJ crushed him with a 450. I thought, well, that's probably it. Rusev kicked out, although just a few moments later, he still succumbed to AJ Styles. That being said, I think this is a great match, and yes, it's probably a one-off for Rusev in terms of the title picture. He'll now move on with something involving Aiden English and Lana in some capacity. They teased that on SmackDown. We'll get to that. But I think he delivered in his opportunity, and you hope down the road that the important decision makers took note of his performance. For AJ, it was just another step towards bigger things upcoming at SummerSlam. We'll see what direction they go. It could be Samoa Joe, could be someone else, but probably will not be Rusev once again. Nonetheless, a good match. The right person won, but in the process of losing, I think Rusev made a real and good impression with some fans that maybe weren't completely sold on his ability to be a main event competitor. Nonetheless, AJ Styles retains that one in what I think was probably the best match of the night. A match that presented some difficulties in terms of how it was booked and in terms of creating fan reaction. Well, it got a reaction, but probably not the reaction that WWE was hoping for. Bobby Lashley and Roman Reigns. You have two guys that are technically faces. Roman, of course, gets primarily booed in most cities, at least for TV tapings and pay-per-views. Bobby Lashley has sort of received a lukewarm reaction since coming back to WWE. So, they had the brawl leading up to this, that they at times sort of hinted that this would determine the number one contender for the Universal title, but they never officially made that stipulation. More on that later in another segment on the Raw recap. But Roman and Lashley, after some crowd disinterest in the early going, I think they finally got the crowd into it. Had a decent match. I mean, there were some good spots. You just saw the one where Lashley was tossed over the top rope to the outside, a brutal landing. It was a loud thud in the arena. Roman and Lashley are two guys that I think are in similar spots in some regard. Very talented, very capable in-ring performers, especially with Roman. He's a proven track record of delivering in big matches, but maybe not booked the way that they should be. And as a result, the fans really didn't want to cheer for either guy at the start. Ultimately, they started warming up to Lashley as this one progressed, and Lashley pulled off a stunner. He got the victory. We didn't see that one coming. Justin, Sean, and I were all wrong about that prediction. So Bobby Lashley, now you figure he's right up there with Roman Reigns, with Seth Rollins, with Braun Strowman as, the top candidates on Raw to be the next champion. And where do you go from here if you're Roman Reigns? Well, probably not too far. He's always going to be in the title picture, so losing this one doesn't hurt him nearly as much as it helps Bobby Lashley. So the right decision. Roman's still going to be a main event guy. Bobby Lashley, Bob, as he's been called, elevated to main event status once again. So, while I was surprised by the decision, because it's tough to ever bet against Roman Reigns, I think it makes sense. It helps Lashley, doesn't hurt Roman too much, and the crowd certainly liked the fact that Bobby Lashley got the victory in Pittsburgh. The next match we're going to highlight is not one that was a five-star classic, not one that really I think was tremendously anticipated going in, but when it's all said and done, months and years from now, it could be the one that people remember most. And that's because of how it ended. It is the steel cage match between Braun Strowman and Kevin Owens. And for those who haven't seen what happens at the end, I implore you to check it out. It was terrifying to witness, but by the same time breathtaking, as you see Braun Strowman standing atop the cage. That was moments after he tossed Kevin Owens off the top of the cage through an announcer's table at ringside. Very, very reminiscent to what happened 20 years prior, almost 20 years to the date, off by less than a month, in the exact same city of Pittsburgh at King of the Ring 1998, when The Undertaker threw Mankind, Mick Foley, off the top of the cell through the announcer's table. That was really the first time it had been seen. We've seen some bumps similar to that since then, but this one's still absolutely unbelievable. Kevin Owens, as a result of being thrown off and through the announcer's table, well, he technically hit the floor, so he's the winner. Didn't seem like a winner. That being said, a very memorable spot, one that probably they could have done without, because it is legitimately very, very dangerous, and it seems as though Kevin Owens was able to take it perfectly. Had he not, however, this would have been a very hot-button topic. You hope he's okay. Every indication is that he is okay. He landed how he should have. But when you take a risk like that, it is serious harm. I mean, could be a debilitating injury, career-ending injury, if he does not land on that table correctly. And I believe they did have, padding underneath. But it's all about how he hits the table. So give credit to Kevin Owens for being willing to do a spot like that. That was so memorable. And Braun Strowman played his part, making sure it went perfectly. But again, yeah, it gets Kevin Owens over maybe with some fans. It certainly helps Braun Strowman continue his rise. But at what cost? That's not a spot that I think should be done very often at all. And you hope, if nothing else, that everyone benefits from it in the long term, and they won't have to do another Kevin Owens, Braun Strowman spot like that, because that's 2 months in a row, going back to Money in the Bank, where Strowman at the top of a ladder by the stage area threw Kevin Owens through a table. So this has been a recurring theme for these two. And Owens is a guy that, well before his WWE tenure, was taking a lot of crazy bumps. You just hope it doesn't add up and really shorten his career. But looked like they did this one perfectly, and as I said, it's going to be something that people are going to remember for a long, long time. So mission accomplished in that regard. Kevin Owens is victorious, certainly doesn't come out looking like a winner, however, against Braun Strowman, and one that will be remembered for its finishing spot for quite some time. And the final match that I want to touch on here, and we're not going to get to every match due to time constraints, but the U.S. Championship match between the champion, Jeff Hardy, the challenger, Shinsuke Nakamura. This one was really a must-win for Nakamura after he failed in multiple attempts to take the world title, the WWE title, away from AJ Styles. Well, this time, first chance at the U.S. title, Nakamura victorious. However, the bigger takeaway was how this match, if you want to call it that, unfolded. You have a good glimpse there of a low blow from Nakamura to Jeff Hardy. That one actually occurred before the bell rang, right after the challenger and champion introductions were completed. So Nakamura gets his now trademark low blow on Jeff Hardy. Hardy was struggling to recover, but ultimately told the ref, yeah, go ahead, ring the bell. Still was not at 100%, still had not fully recovered to his feet, and that left him susceptible to a Kinshasa. Nakamura hit him right after the bell with the move, got the 3 count, and there you have it. I believe they said it was 6 seconds all it took to crown Nakamura the U.S. champion, his first championship on the main roster in WWE in about a year and a half's time. I think this can really help him. This is a guy that needed a victory after losing pretty significantly in the feud against AJ Styles. I think Nakamura won just one of the 6 matches. A couple ended in no contest, but AJ won the big ones at WrestleMania and ultimately the last title match between the two at Money in the Bank. So Nakamura needed to rebound. He did. He has a title now. For Jeff Hardy, you figure, well, where does Jeff Hardy go from here? There's rumors that he's injured. He's going to need some time off. Justin Lowry alluded to that last week, saying that's one of the reasons why he picked Nakamura to win this. Well, it doesn't look like Jeff Hardy's taking time off yet, because after the match ended, very surprisingly, no real word that this individual will be ready to make a return at Extreme Rules. Out comes the Viper, Randy Orton. Comes out seemingly going after Nakamura, stands in the ring, stares down Nakamura, who retreated to the outside, and then all of a sudden, Randy Orton attacks Jeff Hardy. Now, did he give him the RKO? No, because that gets a face reaction. No matter who he does it to, the RKO for Randy Orton gets a face reaction. He didn't want that reaction because he's now back as a heel, so he gave a low blow to Jeff Hardy as well. So Jeff Hardy takes a low blow from Nakamura, the Kinshasa, and then another low blow, this time courtesy of the returning Randy Orton. And keep in mind, those two did have a little bit of an interaction before Orton ultimately checked out with an injury. So they pick back up on that storyline between Randy Orton, now clearly the heel, and Jeff Hardy, who's no longer a champion in WWE as he dropped his U.S. title. Quick rundown of some of the other notable matches. As we mentioned, 5 already. We didn't get to the women's matches. I was not a fan of how either one of them turned out. Alexa Bliss retains her title against Nia Jax. I'm fine with the decision, but the way it happened was pretty chaotic. For some reason, Natalya came out with Nia Jax, and why that friendship continues without much explanation is beyond me. Mickie James was with Alexa Bliss. We've seen that a number of times. And then Ronda Rousey front row. She intervenes, gets involved. Somehow, despite being outnumbered 3-2, Alexa Bliss and Mickie James managed to take out Natalya, Ronda Rousey, and Nia Jax. And Alexa ultimately retains the title. Hard to believe. I mean, Nia and Ronda Rousey on the same side can't take out Mickie James and Alexa Bliss, but that's how this one unfolded. I think there was a lot more creative and realistic ways to book this one, but they went with this sort of ridiculous chaos unfolding, with ultimately Bliss retaining, and she'll be moving on to Ronda Rousey very shortly. The other women's match, I anticipated Carmella retaining. I was dreading that outcome. It's exactly what happened. Ellsworth got involved. Asuka beat the crap out of him, but all it took was one move from Carmella. She gets the pinfall victory again, and she keeps the title, probably moves on to a new challenger. But for Asuka, I don't know that you recover from this. You've now lost 2 times via pinfall to Carmella. Yes, they haven't been clean victories, if you will, but she's been pinned twice by Carmella in as many months, after also failing in her match against Charlotte at WrestleMania. So now she's not winning pay-per-view matches. She's not winning title opportunities. So basically, Asuka's very quickly become one who cannot win the big match on the main roster. Some of the other matches, Daniel Bryan and Kane against the Bludgeon Brothers. This one really was interrupted and sort of went haywire because of what appeared to be a legitimate injury Kane sustained prior to the match. They had to explain his injury with a backstage segment in which the Bludgeon Brothers attacked him and Daniel Bryan. Ultimately, Kane came out in a boot, which looked completely ridiculous. Tried to do a move or two, ultimately couldn't do very much, and the Bludgeon Brothers got the victory to keep the title. So it looks like Kane will be off TV for quite some time. Daniel Bryan moves on to bigger and better things on the single side. Another match that really didn't do much for me. It was a very, basic, typical match. Finn Balor knocks off Constable Baron Corbin. You wanted to get those guys involved, certainly, but just not a very innovative match. Nothing really stood out about it. Pretty vanilla. And ultimately, the right guy won in Finn Balor, but not too much to talk about there. The other tag team championship match, this one on Raw, it was a bit of a shocker. The B team are your tag team champions. They knocked off Matt Hardy and Bray Wyatt, the leader of Worlds. Pretty shocking to see the B team win the titles. We'll see where they go from here. But that kind of more so speaks to the fact that the Raw tag team titles don't really mean anything. I mean, you have a team that's been a joke, and even in making this run are still a comedic act. They're your champions now. So, I don't think that the titles mean very much at all on Monday Night Raw. They certainly mean a little bit more on SmackDown with some of the great talent over there. Speaking of SmackDown, speaking of tag teams, The New Day and Sanity went at it on the pre-show, and it was a pretty good match for the tables match. Not surprised the outcome. Sanity gets their first big victory on the main roster, knocking off New Day as Kofi went through the table courtesy of Eric Young. Not a bad match, though. One that I thought was pretty good for the pre-show to get the fans into the night, get them fired up for what was to come on the main show. And the other match that I mentioned, we did not offer our predictions to it because it was announced very late in the process. Sin Cara, Andrade Cien Almas, a rematch of a pretty darn good match they had on SmackDown last week. Same outcome, Andrade Cien Almas gets the victory. But these guys really put it out there with some crazy spots. They want to make an impression, whether they're on the pre-show, whether they're wrestling on SmackDown. They go out there and lay it all on the line, so credit to those two guys. Certainly Andrade Cien Almas is going to be rising up the ranks of SmackDown in the weeks and months to come, and much-deserved victory for him and for Zelina Vega. But that's going to pretty much do it for the Extreme Rules recap. Overall, I would say the show was below average and below my expectations. The main event, for reasons I laid out, just did not deliver as what it could have been. It could have been a classic, wasn't quite close to that. AJ Styles and Rusev was probably the bright spot of the show, as well as that memorable bump by Kevin Owens. But I would give it probably a 4.5 out of 10. Below average pay-per-view. And the biggest negative, no Elias in his hometown of Pittsburgh was not used even in a capacity of singing a song, cutting a promo, something like that. So missed opportunity there. We didn't see Samoa Joe as well, although he did resurface on Tuesday on SmackDown. And there's even rumors that Hulk Hogan might be there. He was backstage. Of course, they did not use him either at Extreme Rules or on TV this week. We'll see if they do at some point. But ultimately, it was a show that some things were memorable, some things were good, but overall, I think it was well below what it could have been for a pay-per-view. That's going to do it for the recap of Extreme Rules. We'll be back momentarily with the Raw recap as well as a SmackDown summary. That's upcoming here on the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling.